Welcome, everyone. My name is Katie Carpenter. I'm the State Director of New York Agriculture in the Classroom, and I could not be more excited for the start of maple syrup season, my favorite time of the year. We know that the spring is on the way and the sap is starting to flow very soon, and it is a pretty sweet time of year to be in New York State. I am also really excited to introduce you to my friend Damian Hill today. Damian is going to tell you all about his family maple operation, and he is going to show us some pretty neat things as it relates to the maple industry. But before we get started, I want to let you know that you can submit your questions at any time throughout this virtual field trip. Damian will answer as many as he can, and you can put all of your questions in the Q&A box. So be sure to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them all throughout the time that we spend today here on the maple operation. So if you can make sure that you know where the Q&A box is, make sure you can hear us and see us. And with that, I am really pleased to introduce Damian. Damian, can you say hello and tell us about yourself?
How's it going, everybody? My name is Damian Hill, and I'm a third-generation maple producer. So right now, we're out in the middle of one of our sugar woods, and this is Shaver Hill Maple Farm, located in the Catskill Mountains in Delaware County, New York. Like I said, I'm a third-generation farmer. So the woods that we're in, maple syrup has been harvested from these trees for over 100 years. So behind me, down the hill, you can see our sugar house. So all of this tubing that you can see, and I'll get into that, is a network that all feeds down into our sap house where we turn the maple sap into maple syrup. Now, as Katie said, we're just starting into our busy season where the sap is going to start to run. And what I mean by that is if you come over here to this group of maple trees, the maple sap doesn't actually run. It's down in the root system of the trees. And when we get the warm days, the sap is able to go up the trees. And then what we're doing is we're trying to get the sap all the way to the top of the crown so that it can feed the end of the branches to feed the maple leaves. So during the springtime, starting in about February, we come out and we drill our holes and we put in what we call these, and these are called taps. Every single maple tree we're doing is we're actually collecting this water-like sap as it passes through the tap. So back to the weather pattern, you need the warm days to cause the sap to go up past the spile, and then you need the cold nights for the sap to come back down past the spile where we're sucking a little bit. So this blue part is the spile, and then this pink line that goes all the way down, we call that a drop line. And the reason being is that the sap drops all the way from the spile down into this hose network. So then from these littler lines, we feed the bigger lines. Now, I'm going to show you how we actually put the system together. So here with me today, we have an example of what we call a drop line. So we have the pink tubing, and then instead of the spile being blue, this one today is clear. So what we do is we use this tool. This is an industry specific tool where we are able to actually open up and we actually clamp onto the tubing just like that. And then we take our fitting. This is called a T. So then the sap we want to go down into the network. We put the fitting into the hole on one side, and we're actually able to squeeze the T right into the tubing. So then when we pull it off, you can see that that T has joined there. So then what we're able to do is right here, we do that 2 more times, and we're able to hook the drop line up right to the network of trees. So then when the sap is able to run in the months of about February and March, it goes through these blue lines into our main line system, just like you would a major roadway system. All the little lines feed the bigger lines, just like a highway. And then all of the sap starts all the way up there where that booster is, where we have 6 of our main lines. They come together, and then all the sap will come rushing down past us here, and it'll make its way all the way to the sugar house. Now in this woodlot here behind us today, we have almost 1,400, so that's 1,400 maple trees that have all been tapped this year. So every spring we come out to the woods, we drill the hole, and then we put the spile in, and we tap it in to the tree. So what we're able to do is we put the spile in and we tap it in, and we're not hitting it all the way in, we're just tapping it. So as you can see here with this hammer, it's not your usual hammer with a metal head. This head is actually plastic and synthetic so that we're not pounding the spiles and damaging the tree. Another thing to know is when we tap the trees, we don't want to tap into the old holes. So if you see here on the tree, this here would be an old tap hole. So this hole here is roughly probably 20 to 30 years old where that was drilled. And then this one up here was drilled this year, obviously. So when we're drilling, we want to stay away from those old holes. So that way in the off season, the maple tree can heal. So just like us, if we fall down and we get a scratch or a bruise, it takes a little time for it to heal.
That is really interesting. We have quite a few questions, Damian, about how long do trees make sap for and why do trees make sap? Could you go over that part again?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this tree right here that's next to me, as you can see, it looks pretty big, but it's actually very old. So this tree right here could be anywhere from 60 to 80 years old. So the time that this tree got to be about 8 inches round, 8 inches in diameter, is when we got to start pulling the sap from it. But some of the trees on our farm, you see some of the bigger ones, those trees can be anywhere from 100 to even 200 years old that we're tapping. Now, going back to your question, Katie, with the sap, the reason why maple trees produce sap is because the sap is the energy and the food that help create the leaves. So what the tree is trying to do is get that sap with the sugar and the energy all the way up to the crown, to the end of the branches. And that's what feeds your leaves. And then the leaves are what cause photosynthesis, which then in turn allow the tree to grow.
Now, Damian, can you tell us a little bit more about the sap that comes out? Is it dark like we know maple syrup to be? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like?
Yeah. So when sap comes out of the tree, it's actually more similar to water than what you and I would call syrup. So the clear substance is only 2% sugar. So if you were to drink it, it's safe to drink, safe to consume. It tastes like a very subtly sweet water, and it doesn't taste anything like maple syrup. So maple syrup actually gets its flavor through the boiling process, which we'll talk about later on.
And Gwyneth wants to know, I think from Miss Breeze Recco's class, how long does it take to put all the hoses together on all of those trees?
Right, that's a really good question. So this woods here with 1,400 taps, we were able to lay this woods out, and it took us about a week. So a good 7 days of working in the woods all day long to lay it out. But here on this farm, we own the woods, and we actually leave the tubing up year round. So being that we're good stewards of the land, what we do is after the sap is done running in late April, we'll go through and pull the taps and we plug them off, but we actually leave the rest of the tubing system up year round.
Now, we're actually getting a lot of questions about kind of the history of maple syrup. Could you tell us a little bit about the history? How did somebody figure out that you could boil this water from the tree to make something really delicious?
Yeah, that's a good question too, Katie. So from my knowledge, it started off with the Indians here in the Northeast. So as you know, maple trees only grow in Northeast Americas. So it would be here in upstate New York and the greater states as well as Canada. So the way I learned it was that the Indians would take a hatchet and they would throw a hatchet at the tree, and the sap would run down the hatchet where they would then collect this sweet water and drink it. So when they were drinking it, they said, oh, this is really good. You know, they like the sweetness. And then they began to use it for their cooking. So when they had their big pots of stews and soups and what have you, they would use the maple sap. And must be somebody got too tired and fell asleep one time when it was boiling, and it turned the sap all the way to syrup. And then from there, you know, with time and innovation, we soon began to learn how to process maple syrup and how we could keep it and the other uses of the maple syrup.
Now, one of our schools from New York City, PT33Q, wants to know, Ash would like to know, how do you prevent the sap from freezing in the collection tubes?
Yep. So as you just saw there in that little booster, it actually is frozen. So there's nothing that we can actually do to prevent the freezing. So because of that, so on a day like today, we're 22 degrees and sunny here, the sap is actually frozen and not running. However, here in a few days this weekend, it's actually supposed to get warmer. So we know that water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So doesn't sap because it's almost 98% water. So when the sun comes out and the temperature gets warm, that's when the sap starts to come from the trees. And all of these lines, with the aid of the warm air and the hot sun, will actually thaw, and then the whole system is back up and running again. That's a really good question.
Now, before we start transitioning down to the sugar house, Troy from Mrs. Lamfrin's class wants to know how much sap is in each maple tree.
That's a good question. So to highlight that, it takes about 40 gallons to make 1 gallon of syrup. So if you do the math on that, that means for every little spile that was tapped into the tree, we're going to make about a quart of maple syrup. So on this farm, we actually tap over 6,000 trees. So that means this year we're hoping to make between 2,000 and 3,000 gallons of syrup.
And Mrs. Pollock's class wants to know.
And
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Damien. Please continue.
Well, yeah, no problem. So what I was gonna say is, like, you see this tree here. So if you look at the bark and you can see how old this bark is, the tree is only going to grow a very, very small amount each year. This tree right here could be almost 200 years old. I just wanted to touch again on that. And as you can see with this tree, we have more than one tap. So one rule of thumb that I do as a sugar maker is if I can put my arms around the tree, I put one tap in. However, if I can't put my arms all the way around the tree, then I would put 2 taps in it. And the reason why we do that is because on the outer layer of the tree, so you have your bark, and then the next layer is what we call sapwood, we're able to then extract the sap from that sapwood. And then the center of the tree is what we call the heartwood. And you don't want to get your spile all the way into that heartwood because that would damage the tree.
Now, Bonnie from Mrs. Lewis's class wants to know, did animals ever chew this tubing?
They do. Unfortunately, we're working with Mother Nature, so that's everything from the weather all the way to the nature and all the creatures. So one of the biggest struggles that we face, mainly in the off season and during the season, is squirrels like to use our maple tubing as a highway. So they'll run up and down the tubing, and then they get curious when they see the sap going by, and they actually will chew a little bit, and it'll actually cause a hole in our tubing, which causes us a volume loss. So that means during the season when it's warm and it's running, I come up to our woods and I walk all of these lines constantly, making sure that there's no damages, no branches down, and that everything is all good and tight and running well.
Very neat. So I think we might try to transition over to your side-by-side and
Okay.
head down the road at this point. But Damien, while we're going over, can you tell us about your education? Did you go to school to be a maple producer?
So yeah, so unfortunately they don't make maple syrup school, or I would have been there. So I got my education from Cornell University. It's an Ivy League school located in Ithaca, New York. And what I studied was applied economics and management. So in short, it was ag business. And the reason I chose that path was that I had a passion for maple, but when I came home, I wanted to learn how I could grow our business, become more efficient, more up to date with the times, increase our marketing of our syrup, and of course, be more profitable.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. It's really an inspiration in so many different career pathways in agriculture.
Yes. And the one thing to highlight too is to be a maple producer, you don't have to go to college. You don't have to, specialize in a certain thing. The information is out there where you can learn about maple production. And there's boys and girls who are, 4 years old who are making maple syrup, all the way up to grandparents and great grandparents up to 80, 90, even 100 years old that partake in the production of maple.
So we are now moving on to like the next step in the process. Everything starts in the sugar bush, in the tree stand, in the forest. And now where are we headed?
So, yep. So now, as you can see where the camera's pointed, we're headed down our sugar bush. So this is actually going to be similar to the path that the sap would take as if it was running and it was headed to the sugar house. So where this woods is located is directly north up the hill from our sugar house. So when we tap, all of the sap is able to go through this piping system and through the network and make its way all the way down to our sugar house.
So you really have to think about the geography of your land as you're planning out all this tubing and where you're going to tap.
Correct. So the biggest thing is we set our systems up so that if you were to take water and pour water down the tubes, that the water would naturally make its way to our sugar house. So as you can see here on the left is two of our main lines that transfer sap all the way up from the woodlot all the way down to our sap house. So there's for every maple tree that we have here on our farm, there's over 50 feet of tubing. That would mean that on 6,000 trees, we have accounted for over worth of tubing. So what we'll do is we'll look here across the road to our right-hand side. As you can see, this building here, we don't use it anymore. This is our old sugar house. At our old sugar house, we fired our arches with wood, and there we boiled the sap down kind of what one might call the old-fashioned way. So we had old galvanized sap buckets, and we used to tap about 2,000 trees there. And then when my grandfather came to the farm in the late 70s, he decided that it was time to increase our production and increase our yield. So we started tapping more trees, and then with that became a new sugar house. So in this part of the old sap house, this is where we used to back in with all of the firewood, and then keep it for how things used to be.
So as we move across the road, Mrs. House Class wants to know, are you a full-time maple farmer?
I am, and it's the greatest job in the world. So I graduated from Cornell about 1.5 years ago, and I decided to come back home and go into business with my dad and my uncle. So here, our sugar house is open 364 days a year. We actually close on Christmas, but other than that, we're here every single day of the year. And because of that, so what we do is the sap only runs in the springtime. So that means from February, March, and April. And then the rest of the year, we spend marketing our syrup. So you'll see later in the tour that we make value-added products, and we also sell our syrup in smaller bottles and jugs to the consumer.
So we are just going to take a moment. We lost our video feed just for a moment, but we're transitioning into a big metal building. So just hold with us for just a moment as we get reconnected. We'll throw your questions in the Q&A. So we'll get reconnected just to the Wi-Fi in just a moment.
Good. You back on, Katie?
Oh, we can see you and hear you. Perfect.
All right, great. So now this is what we call a sugar house. So the term of a sugar house is where all of the sap comes to a central location and is then boiled. So I don't know if you can quite hear it right now, but we actually have our vacuum pump running. So where those main lines are coming down into the building, we actually are sucking the sap down from the trees through the woods and into here in our sugar house. So you can follow those blue lines all the way across. And then over here, we use a vacuum pump, which is the black box in the back. And then we have the two blue cylinders in the front is what we refer to as a releaser. So we actually are putting vacuum, which is negative pressure, on one cylinder, while the other cylinder is dumping. And then with a simple mechanical float system, when it trips, the one that was dumping then becomes vacuum filled, and then the other bay can dump. Now, what you can see here, the tank here on your left, this tank holds roughly 3,000 gallons of sap, and then the tank behind holds over 5,000 gallons of sap. Now, the reason why we have such an expansive tank system is because on a given day, we can expect to see yields of over a gallon of sap, so a gallon of pure maple sap per tap. So that means on one day with all of our taps, we can experience over 6,000 gallons of maple sap. Now, keep in mind, that sap comes in at 2% and has to be boiled down to make maple syrup. Maple syrup is 67% sugar. So it's going to take the 40 gallons of sap to make that 1 gallon of syrup. So in order to get to that process, I'll bring you over here to another machine that we use, which is called a reverse osmosis machine. Now, we call this an RO. And what an RO does is it takes 2% sap and it uses a high pressurized filtration system to bring the sap up to 10% sugar. So if you do the math, we're actually pulling out 2/3 of the water. Now, what does that mean? That means that's 2/3 less boiling time, and that's 2/3 less fuel consumption. So this machine right here is worth its weight in gold because it cuts all of our labor down by 2/3. So then if you follow the tube all the way up and out, the 2% sap that's now 10% goes up into this feed tank. And then this feed tank is what feeds our evaporator. Does anybody have any questions about the RO system or how the sap comes into the sugar house?
Yeah, we do. So we have a couple questions. Ethan wants to know from Mrs. Lewis's class, how long does it take the sap to get to the sugar house?
Yep. So the sap, it's not really measured in a miles per hour thing, but as soon as that sap comes out of that drop line, it would just be like a car on a major highway system. It goes through the little lines and into the big sap line and right down to the sugar house it comes. So within a matter of a minute or two, by the time that sap comes out of the tree, it's here in the sugar house.
Now, with your RO machine, you have a byproduct, and that byproduct that you aren't putting into the evaporator because you're trying the best you can to get out as much water as possible, but you have water left over. Do you throw that water away? Do you drink it? What do you do with that purified water?
Right. Yeah. So we don't want to throw the water away. What we actually do is we recycle that water. So when the water comes out of the sap, it's pure water, right? So what we do is we actually collect that water and we store it. And then in order to wash that machine, we have to take all of that water that we pulled out of the sap and we use it to clean that machine. We use it to clean our tanks and we use it as cleaning water. So nothing here is actually pure wastewater. It's actually going to have a dual purpose.
Now, one question, Mrs. Stanley's first grade class wants to know who invented or figured out all of this amazing technology that we're seeing in your sugar house?
Right. That's a very good question. So a lot of the technology that you're seeing here is industry specific. So if you go to an apple farm or a beef farm, you're not going to see this kind of technology. So with time comes innovation in agriculture, right? So one thing that's pushed the maple industry very far along is that it's used its network along with dairy farmers and other farmers to use other things. So a lot of our vacuum pumps and releasers have been modified from other industries. However, you take a machine like the reverse osmosis, that actually comes from water purification, where they actually are taking water, say from the ocean, and turning salt water into drinking water. It's the same thing that we're doing here. However, we're just putting a different type of filtration on it where we're pulling the pure water out.
Great. Thank you, Damian. There's lots of great questions, but we'll let you move on to the next step in the process.
Yeah, so what we'll do is, so we're right here. I'm going to show you how the sap goes through the evaporator. So up in this tank is where we have our 10% sugar sap sitting. So what it does, it comes through this stainless pipe all the way down here to the front. And then this right here is what we call a float system. So what happens is there's a probe in here, and when the sap level gets too low, the probe tells this valve to open and more sap is let in. And then when it gets too much, the probe tells this valve to turn off and it lets the rest boil out. So now we have 3 stages here. We have the drop flue pan, we have a steam away, and then we have a hood. So the sap actually comes into the steam away first. And the steam away is a unique part of this setup because we're actually recycling the steam that comes from the boiling process of the back pan, and we're actually condensing the steam to hot water, and we're using that hot water to preheat the sap that would actually be originally cold coming into the evaporator, and we're now bringing that up to temperature. So if we come around to the other side, we can actually look right into that steam away and you can see what the back pan looks like. So this right here is what this whole back pan looks like. So the fire comes up in between here and the sap is actually in between these troughs. And the reason why it's designed that way is we want to increase the amount of surface area per unit of sap. So then that way we can get the sap up to temperature quicker. Now, maple sap boils and turns to syrup 7 degrees over the boiling point of water. So water boils at 212 degrees. So that means syrup boils at 219 degrees. So if you look here in our front pan, or also known as a finishing pan, you can see that there's actually sap that's almost syrup. So we've made one boil this year, and then when we shut down, we leave this to then turn it into syrup with our next run. And so as you can see up here, that's what we call a steam stack. So when sap boils or water boils, you create steam. And in order to get that steam off of the sap, we have to give it a channel to go directly outside. Now, when we draw maple syrup off, so this is what we call our draw off, there's a temperature probe in here. So at 219 degrees, this valve will open and we'll pull off pure maple syrup. Now, pure maple syrup has a natural byproduct in it referred to as niter. So as you can see here in this pail, this is niter. It's called, also known as sugar sand. So this is a natural byproduct of the boiling process that we need to filter out because you don't want to put that on your pancakes. It tastes just like gritty sand and it's not very palatable. So what we do is we use this machine called a filter press. So in between here, there is what we call banks, and there's filter papers that filter this sugar sand or niter out of the syrup, where it then goes directly into the drums. So as you can see here around our sugar house, these are 40-gallon stainless steel drums that we hot pack all of our syrup in. Now we're unable to bottle our syrup right away when we boil it because on this evaporator, we make a gallon of syrup a minute when it's boiling. So this evaporator, it might not be as big on camera, but it's actually 6 feet wide and 16 feet long.
Wow, so say that again, Damian. You make 1 gallon of syrup every minute.
Correct. So that means in a full hour, I'm going to make 60 gallons. So that means on these stainless drums, that's over 1.5 of these is going to be full in 1 hour.
And starting at the other end, it comes in as that sap from the reverse osmosis. It's been filtered. It still pretty much looks like it did when it came out of the tree, still that clear water type solution. But then as it moves through this big evaporator, it becomes syrup by the time it's put into those barrels.
Correct. So then, as Katie said, we then put the syrup into the barrels, and then we need to bottle the maple syrup, right? So in order to bottle it, we heat the maple syrup back up, and then we are able to put it into bottles. Now over here, this is kind of a unique aspect. This is for when we boil the maple syrup. Every single one of these jars represents a whole 40 gallons of maple syrup. So as you can see, they're all different colors. Now, the different colors is representative of how much flavor the maple syrup is going to have. So they're all the same consistency and they're all considered maple syrup, but the lighter ones are actually going to have a lesser, more delicate flavor. And then the darker ones have a stronger, more robust flavor.
And that all happens in the same maple season from February to April.
Correct. So the way this is set up, the top 2 rows was actually last year's production system. So each one of those jars was a full barrel of syrup from last year. And then this bottom shelf, this single barrel is all the syrup that we've made this year. So as you can see, the season has just begun.
Now, Brooke from Mr. Needle's class wants to know, what ingredients do you add to the sap to make syrup?
So that's a good question. Maple syrup is 100% a natural agricultural product. So there is no sugar added. We don't add corn syrup. We add no dyes. There's absolutely nothing added. So maple syrup gets its color through the boiling process. So it starts off like that water-like structure, and then through the caramelization process of boiling, that's what causes the syrup to darken and increase and become thicker.
We are getting a lot of questions about, do you do this all yourself? You talked about your dad and your uncle, but do you have anyone else who helps you on your maple farm?
So we do not. So it's my family business and so it's my dad, my uncle, and myself. And that's all there is. So all 3 of us, and that's it. We have no employees. We manage this whole network of 6,000 taps.
And Mrs. Thaxter's class wants to know, are those machines we just looked at pretty expensive? Oh, we may have lost Damian for a moment. I'm sure we'll get him back in just a moment. So we
This is
will.
my father.
Oh, here we are. We're back with you, Damian. And I think Mr. Best needs to orientate his camera because we're off.
Okay, can you see now, Katie, or no?
Yep, we can see you, but tell Mr. Best that the orientation is off. We're portrait. We need to be.
You gotta turn it. Your portrait, and it needs to be landscape. So what you can see here, this is my father, Dwayne. And so we've taken maple syrup and we've heated it up past the boiling temperature of maple syrup. And then the syrup comes down into this, what we call a trough, where it's then spun and stirred a little bit. And here in just a few moments, you're going to see that we're able to draw the maple syrup, which has been stirred, into these molds, and we're going to make a maple sugar candy. Now, one thing to note here, you can see that it's pure maple syrup and we've had nothing added. So again, no dyes, no sugar, nothing. It's a pure maple product that we're able to make these maple sugar candies off of. So through that stirring process, he'll slowly start to draw the candies off, and that syrup that was that clear amber color is going to slowly turn into a golden sugar candy, also known as maple candy.
And this is just one of the maple value-added maple products that you make?
Yes, that's correct. So what we can do is we can step over and I'll show you some of the other products that we make. So this is one of our maple kitchens. So here we make the maple sugar candy. We make a maple cream, which is a spread, again, an all natural maple product. And we also make a granulated maple sugar, which is a substitute for white confectionery sugar. So with our business, yep, keep going, Katie.
A lot of these pieces, it's just really about science and about chemistry, right? You have to know how sugar reacts and what it can, how you can manipulate it to make something different and delicious. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So with that sugar, I don't know, some of you might be familiar with a super saturated solution. That's all maple sugar candy is. Same with maple cream, is we're taking the saturation level of syrup to a next level. So then this room that we're walking into, this is our shipping room and our stock room. So we recently renovated this, and this is where all of our maple products are able to be shipped out. So we package up our maple products, and not only do we ship it across New York, we ship it across the country, and we also have had the opportunity to ship internationally. So here in this room, you can see that there's more than just maple syrup. So along with maple syrup, we have been able to come up with a bunch of other value-added products. One of our most highlighted ones is the maple cotton candy. So maple cotton candy is pure maple syrup, and pure sugar cane. And what we do is we put it through a regular cotton candy machine, and we have maple flavored cotton candy with no added dyes or anything like that. And some other recipes that we've come up with is maple barbecue sauce, a maple hot sauce, maple mustard. We have a maple walnut topping, a maple spice rub, maple coffee. We have maple coated nuts, and we even have stuff for your pets. We have maple puppy pancakes.
Oh, delicious. Now, Damien, did you and your family come up with all these recipes?
We did not. So this is one thing in New York State. We have the New York State Maple Producers Association. And with that, we have a network of other maple producers where we're able to knowledge exchange and share ideas and share recipes, and then also share all of these unique bottles that we use to market the maple syrup throughout the year.
Mrs. Robinson's third grade class wants to know, what's your best-selling product?
One of our best-selling products is probably the maple popcorn. So the maple popcorn is it's a caramel coated maple popcorn that's coated with maple syrup. So what we can do is I'll take you down and we'll go and I'll show you our Hall of Fame. So fortunately, as a third generational maple producer, we've been around for over 100 years. And because of that, we've had the unique opportunity of sharing our business and how the process of maple syrup is being made, and through newspapers and on interviews and all over the world. One of our bigger highlights was that we were actually featured in the New York Times, which is a circulated newspaper in New York City. And then this map here, as you can see, is a map of the United States. So as of last year, we have actually shipped our maple syrup and maple products to all 50 states in the country. Even all the way down to Hawaii and even right here out to Alaska. And then behind you, you can see that on a world map, we've shipped to over 40 different countries.
How do you manage your online sales? I'm assuming these are all through online sales and people find you. How do you help people find you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have an Instagram page, we have a Facebook page, and then we do a large mail order business. So if you order from us, you become a part of our mailing list. And then anytime we do a special event, special promotion, we'll send you a notification via email, or you'll get a postcard in the mail. So then here where we are, this is our maple gift shop. So as you can see, we have up top is more of a museum of older demonstrational products, like the old tin cans where maple syrup used to be. And then we down below here, we have cutting boards that are made locally. We have cheese that's made local. And then the rest of the store is filled with our other value-added maple products. So here you can buy your maple cream, your maple jelly. We have a huge display of glass maple syrup. We've got maple brittle, pancake flour to accompany your maple syrup. And then of course we have some books that some of you may have read before that talk about what maple syrup is, how it's made, and other types of the industry as well.
So we have some questions. Dustin from Mrs. Meeker's class wants to know, how old were you when you started helping with your maple operation?
That's a good question. So I'll bring you right over here. As you can see, so believe it or not, this is actually a picture of me. So I was in the woods since I was really little. So I've actually spent my entire life here on the farm.
Very nice. That's a very sweet picture. And so how many maple products are you making at your shop, at your sugar house?
Yeah, so right now on the shelf, we have over 40 different maple products.
And what's your favorite maple product besides syrup from Ms. Eggleston's class?
Yeah, my personal favorite is the maple cotton candy. So what we'll do is we're coming back over here to where we were making the maple sugar. So as you can see in just a few short moments, these are the maple sugar candies. So right before your eyes, it went from pure maple syrup to maple sugar candies.
We had a question come in. I'm sorry, I can't find who it was from, but they wanted to know, do you have other shapes that you can make it into besides the maple leaf?
Yes. So not only do we do small maple leaves, we also do big maple leaves. And then during Easter, we do Easter bunnies. And then we also have a lot of other fun shapes that we do throughout the year. Some ones that you might see out in public, you might see a big moose head, you might see a turkey, a Santa Claus. There's a whole bunch of different shapes.
And we have some other great questions about the boiling process. They were wondering, Mrs. Garrison's class wants to know, how do you clean those big tanks? They look sparkly clean.
Yeah, so we actually clean all of our tanks every time they get emptied, and we use big brushes.
And Mrs. Shell's class wants to know, and a couple others, how hot does the boiler get?
Yeah, so that evaporator gets super hot. So underneath, you'll actually see temperatures over 2000 degrees. And then this is my uncle, David. So he, as well as my father, all three of us are involved with the business.
So we have some SAP questions. From Mrs. Stanley's class, do insects ever get inside of your SAP?
So yes, they do. So when the sap comes into the sugar house, we actually filter the sap. So you didn't see it today, but there's a pre-filter that all of that sap would go through. So if you get any bugs or critters or pieces of wood, all of that gets filtered out before it even becomes maple syrup. That's part of being in agriculture, right? Being out in with Mother Nature, you're going to experience, a mixture with some of those things.
Mrs. Robinson's third grade class wants to know, so we saw the different colors of the finished syrup that you're pulling from your barrels. So do you boil it longer to get the darker color?
No, so that's the cool part. So all of those maple syrups were boiled at exactly the same time. What that is that comes from the minerals and the nutrients that are in the sap that come in when they come into the sugar house. So I actually don't know what kind of syrup we're going to make, if it's going to be golden, amber, dark, or very dark, until it actually comes off of the evaporator and we grade it.
Now, Caitlin wants to know, what happens if the sap stops coming in? What do you do?
Yep. So that could mean one of two things. Usually number one is that it got too cold and the whole system froze, right? Option number two, which we don't want to see, is that the main line actually broke apart or pulled apart and all the sap is going on the ground and it's before the sugar house. So that means we'd have to run out and go and repair that leak.
Now, Lily from Mrs. Lewis's class wants to know, is there anything else you can make with sap, just plain sap?
Yeah, you can. So there's a couple companies right now that actually are taking that sap, and instead of turning it into maple syrup, they're actually turning it into a drink. So in your local grocery stores, you may see it. They're actually marketing it as tree water or maple sap that you can drink, and you can take the benefit from all of the natural minerals and stuff like that and vitamins that are in the sap.
We have a great question. What determines the price per gallon of finished syrup? How do you decide what that price is going to be?
Yeah, so here today we walked through all the way from tree to table pretty quickly, but unfortunately what you didn't see is all the hours that get put into it, right? So every year we go through the tapping process, we then have to boil it. So we have to fuel our evaporator, we have all the electricity, you have the price of the container, right? So there's a lot of costs that go into making the maple syrup. So we summarize those costs and how much it costs to make that syrup, and that's how you come to what your price is.
Well, Damian, we have had such a great time today. We're at the end of our time, but let's just end on one last question. Can you tell us why you love being a maple syrup producer?
Yep. So I love it because every day is different. I get to spend every day with my family and we all get along fantastically. And most importantly, I'm getting to do what I love. And what I love the most here today, I'm able to share with you guys how maple syrup is made and why maple syrup is an important part of your diet and why it's such a staple crop of New York State agriculture.
Well, we at New York Agriculture in the Classroom cannot thank you enough for the time that you've put in. At 22 years old, you are an incredible spokesman for the industry and maple producer, and are building a great business that I'm sure will last for generations to come. Thank you for inviting us to your home and your business today.
All right, thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.